Ukraine is so desperate for soldiers that it's now going into theaters and restaurants and looking for military-age males and confiscating them, arresting them, and pushing them into compulsory service. To me, it was pretty evident that the government, not Biden or Obama, but the government was not going to allow Trump back into the White House. You just have to know what's going on and read between the lines and have the experience to see sort of the real picture. You ever heard of the USAID?
No.
USAID. USAID is a giant organization within the State Department. And there's a woman named Samantha Power who's the director. Okay. She was Obama. Ukraine is so desperate for soldiers that it's now going into theaters and restaurants and looking for military-age males and confiscating them, arresting them, and pushing them into compulsory service. To me, it was pretty evident that the government, not Biden or Obama, but the government was not going to allow Trump back into the White House. You just have to know what's going on and read between the lines and have the experience to see sort of the real picture. You ever heard of the USAID?
No.
USAID. USAID is a giant organization within the State Department. And there's a woman named Samantha Power who's the director. Okay. She was Obama's ambassador to the United Nations. And we're going to get off Ukraine here for a minute, but it is all tied in. All of that. And my point goes back to the government is full of idiots. You know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And one of the last things I did in the service was conducted the Department of Defense's first ever joint cyber defense operation, where we combated a near-peer cyber threat attempting to compromise a ballistic missile defense system we were emplacing in Eastern Europe. Some of that is most likely still classified. So Trump called him out on it and said, well, on the one hand, you're developing friendly relations and you're developing dependencies on them with regard to your energy needs. But then you're trying to tell me that Russia is the enemy and we need to build up military capabilities so we can go to war with them. What is it?
There's a new American gangster, 'cause we speak bold, give no fuck about the haters. They can take freedom from a cold dead hands. We're locked in low for the last days. 'Cause we're the new American gangster, ready to die for this game.
Consistent with my real gender.
Ready to die for this land.
Welcome to the Patriot Punkcast. I'm your host, Chase Matheson, and tonight we have a little bit of a different episode, geopolitics. We are going to be discussing Ukraine and what started the war, or should we be in the war? Is there any merit to Putin's claims or Zelensky's claims? And we're going to be speaking with a veteran who has a little bit more knowledge than the average veteran might on the situation. Do you have dogs? What about cats? Chances are you have one or the other. And if you don't, then you probably have kids or a messy husband. Either way, cleaning up after your loved ones can be a challenge. Now, I've been around Kirby my entire life, and I sold my first one when I was 14. And the one thing that I know is that if you spend half your day working and the other half cleaning up, you're tired by the end of it. And it's time that you previewed the new Kirby. You see, good housekeeping is just like every other profession. It requires the right tools to do the job. And with 12 machines in one and a lifetime factory rebuild plan, your made in the USA Kirby is just what you need to make cleaning easier. And does Christmas have you in a tight spot financially? You can put your payments off until 2025 with approved credit. head on over to midtandkirby.com and schedule a time to see the Kirby man. Oh, all right. How are you, Sean?
I'm doing well, Chase. How are you?
I'm well. Can you just tell everybody a little bit, your credentials, really?
So my name is Sean Raesemann, and I'm bringing to you 30 years of Air Force career service. Started in the enlisted corps, got my degree, became an officer in 1995, and retired in June of 2020. Landed here in Brentwood, Tennessee, and found myself doing a whole bunch of things outside of just sitting on my butt playing golf. Today, I own a business pursuing a PhD at MTSU, and I'm also active in the MTSU Center for Student Coaching and Success. In addition to that, though, I depend on my 30 years of Air Force history to kind of stay abreast and help me understand geopolitics, specifically what we're doing with regard to national security. And that's what connected me with you on this issue of Ukraine.
What role did you play in the Air Force? Were you a fighter pilot or a cook or?
No, I started as a nuclear weapons technician working on the intercontinental ballistic missile, specifically the Minuteman III weapon system. Did that for 4.5 years before becoming a second lieutenant and arriving at the Pentagon, responsible for the Office of the Secretary of Defense's conversion from what we called thick net or cabling networks to fiber optic networking. I built joint warfare simulation centers inside the DC area. And then from there, I went into Iraq, and I worked with the Office of Special Investigations, specifically building a network that would allow us to integrate foreign intelligence with the intelligence we were collecting so that we could have in a sort of an information collection operation nexus, an icon we called it, which would allow operations to turn assumptions into facts, which would inform commanders as they pursued their operational objectives. Then from there, I went into basically information technology management, network engineering, where I built the network that FEMA fell on top of when they set up rescue operations and response operations to support the 9/11 attack in New York City. And then I forget what I did after that, but I ended up in Europe, and I worked out of the United States Air Force's in Europe headquarters, which also integrated me into the European Command headquarters in Stuttgart, Germany. And it was in that period, I think I commanded a squadron in there too. And so all in all, I think it was about 4 or 5 years where we were in Europe specifically during the operation we conducted in Libya, and some other things I think probably still remain classified. But from there we went to Korea, and then from there we went to I went to War College and CENTCOM and did a whole bunch of things. Ended up working at the senior echelon of our national security decision making echelon, and then I ended up calling it a career.
How long, or you said 4 or 5 years you were in Europe?
Yeah.
When was that 4 or 5 year period?
That was 2009 to 2000. Actually, it was 2007 to 2011.
Okay, and that was before the Crimea invasion, then.
Oh yeah. I was in War College when Russia essentially invaded and then annexed Crimea. But as a little bit of a amateur historian, and then serving in and seeing the theater firsthand. I have some thoughts on this whole Ukrainian-Russian conflict, and I don't think I don't trust the media narrative at all. And anyway, that's what led me here to you today.
Wow, that is an impressive resume. So you were a little bit more than just a cook. What was your MOS or your specialty, if that even applies at that level? I'm a little ignorant on.
Yeah, MOS is your military operational specialty, and that applies to the Army. In the Air Force, we call it your Air Force Specialty Code, your AFSC. On the enlisted side, I was a 2MOX1, which I don't think exists anymore, but that was a nuclear ballistic missile electronic maintenance technician. Then I became an officer, and we were classified as 33S's, which is communications and information technology. Later in my career, I became a 17 Delta, and the 17 Deltas were cyber warfare officers.
Okay, so like I said, a pretty extensive resume. Have you ever actually been to the Ukraine, or just in different parts of Europe?
Not been in Ukraine, but did spend quite a few years in Europe, and then of course at the national security and strategic decision-making echelon of the government.
I take it while you were in Europe, you had to deal a lot with Russian politics and Eastern European politics, even if you were more focused in, North Africa or other parts of Europe. Is that?
So in Europe, we were I was primarily responsible for all telecommunication systems and the maintenance of those systems that encompass the European continent. Those systems included satellite, high frequency, land mobile radios, all your network communications infrastructure, your telephony, all of that fell under my purview. And eventually I commanded a squadron which maintained all of the hardware and systems that kept those operational. We deployed actually into North Africa during Operation Odyssey Dawn. And that was the first mission of its kind back then for my particular unit. But we were the experts, the subject matter experts, and we had the best ability to accomplish that mission, which at the time was just basically air support and reconnaissance operations.
Would you say that you have a better understanding of the Ukraine-Russia conflict than probably the average citizen?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the average citizen can be pretty smart. It's just my understanding based on where the things I've experienced in service and my study of geopolitics in addition to my service experiences. And then one of the last things I did in the service was conducted the Department of Defense's first ever joint cyber defense operation, where we combated a near peer cyber threat attempting to compromise a ballistic missile defense system we were emplacing in Eastern Europe. I'll leave most of that sort of ambiguous, but you can probably determine our adversary given some of the things I just mentioned. Mm-hmm. Not sure. Some of that is most likely still classified. But my experience with Europe and NATO is pretty extensive. I mean, everything we did in the 4 years that I was in the theater dealt with NATO because, and that's a little bit of what I'll go into here. But as a at, as a NATO partner, we pretty much actually the United States drives NATO. In fact, I remember when I was working for a four-star who later became the Secretary of Defense, one of the things he said was in a meeting was that the United States could not continue to subsidize European nations' defense. And there's plenty of open source reporting on President Obama and President Trump pleading with the NATO nations, the NATO members, to up their contributions to meet their 2% of GDP obligation to fund the NATO military alliance. And if you want, Chase, I'll just tell you what I know, and you can guide the conversation as you will.
Yeah, just give everybody your take on
Okay.
what's going on in Ukraine.
So everybody probably remembers that NATO was founded as a post-World War II alliance, and it was specifically it was collective defense of Europe against a potential attack or attempt to conquer by the Soviet Socialist Republic, the USSR. Okay, so that was a 1947 agreement that created NATO. And for all the way up to the USSR's collapse in 1990, NATO was it. It was the primary focus of the Cold War in terms of our main effort to defend against Russian aggression or the Soviet Union aggression. Everybody understands the Reagan Star Wars program and all of that brought it down the fall of the Soviet Union, the USSR. And so when the USSR collapsed, the NATO mission ended, right? There was no more threat. And so, in fact, if you go back and you actually do some homework, you'll find that NATO and Russia actually negotiated a partnership. Yeltsin and Clinton at the time were discussing Russia becoming a member of NATO or joining NATO in some form or fashion. I think that almost went to a formal offer or invitation until the military-industrial complex realized that if that was to happen, then they would lose that weapons market. Now, in order to become a member of NATO, it's more than just 2% of your GDP. Your defense department, your military, has to employ, develop, and practice with weapons that are compliant with NATO standards. Interoperability is a key because it's a collective defense, right? So, NATO's ballistic missile defense systems have to be interchangeable with those of Italy, those of Britain, those with France, although France wasn't a military member of NATO. They've kind of been back and forth.
Well, by interchangeable, do you mean
interoperable
or interoperable?
Yeah.
Same controls? Does it have to same plugins? Like, what we kind of put that in layman's terms for people?
Well, they just have to be compliant with NATO standards.
Okay.
So if NATO, as a collective defense alliance, develops a requirement for a weapon system, then all NATO partners have to have that weapon system in their inventory. Well, who makes out from that type of an arrangement but the players the players in the military-industrial complex make out. So when you stand to lose a significant market like NATO, the MIC, I'm going to call them the MIC, which is the military-industrial complex, the acronym, the MIC's going to have something to say about that. And so it's my contention that when at the last minute, I guess, we could say the last minute, but I don't know exactly when, but somebody from the MIC or the MIC lobby rose up and said, well, we can't have Russia inside NATO, because if Russia becomes a member of NATO, then NATO really has no mission. And so we lose that weapons market. So instead, if you look back, I think the mission set at that point was Partnership for Peace. So PFP, I remember. So under the Partnership for Peace, NATO and the Russia were cooperating militarily, politically, strategically, with regard to trying to redefine the NATO mission set. Okay, since we no longer had the big bear, the big Russian bear to defend against, NATO had to redefine itself, had to reorient itself, had to reinvent itself. It took a
Otherwise,
while.
they lose all that money, right?
Well, to lose to find its purpose. I mean, what purpose did it have? If it was built and designed to defend against a Soviet Union incursion into Europe or an attack, if you go back in time, you'll find this gap in I forget which mountain range it is, but it was called the Fulda Gap, Fulda Gap, and that was a gap, I think, in northeastern Germany, that if the Russians were going to attack, that would be where their ground forces would enter the heart of Europe. So that Fulda Gap, and I visited the Fulda Gap, that Fulda Gap was a heavily monitored and well-defended gap in the mountains. And so when you're geared up for that type of defense operation, or that type of possibility, and that possibility disappears, then what do you do? So I remember the Partnership for Peace mission set. I remember the cooperation with Russia in the early 90s. And then all of a sudden, we resorted back to, well, Russia's the bad guy and NATO is the good guy. And so therefore NATO's got some missions. What? They were humanitarian relief operations, and a couple others. And I don't think any of them stuck. And here's another key indicator. So why is it necessary, if the alliance is credible and maintains a mission, why would a nation not contribute its 2% obligation? They wouldn't, right? If it's a credible defense organization and there's a mission,
as long as they're getting their bang for their buck. Yeah.
Right. I mean, so the nations were not meeting their 2% obligation. Kind of tells you that it wasn't a priority for them, that there were other priorities, whether they be domestic or foreign, that money was better hedged against. They got a better return on that investment.
And the people that you're saying have a vested interest in NATO is almost entirely the military industrial complex, the weapons manufacturers. Is that?
Yes, I would contend that. Yes.
Yep.
And then you can go into, it's antiquated thinking, really. You remember the arguments during, I think, the Bush years, where they talked about the rightful. Was it proper for the U.S. to be the world's policeman?
Mm-hmm.
And what that meant was, do we bring about world peace using our military instrument of power? So the four general instruments of power are diplomacy, information, military, and economics. Now, you can find other constructs that expand beyond the four I just mentioned, but we typically say that a nation's instruments of power are DIME, D-I-M-E, okay? A criticism around the globe at the U.S. is that we lead with our military, okay? And if you looked at the budget for the Department of Defense versus the budget for the Department of State, it's out of balance. I mean, the Department of Defense is an $800 billion, will soon be close to $1 trillion budget outlay, and I'm not sure where the State Department is, but I'm probably half that. Okay. Now we have State Department embassies and consulates around the globe, but our Defense Department is organized in terms of combatant commands, regional oriented combatant commands through areas of responsibility. Okay, there's Central Command, which is the Middle East. There's European Command, which of course is Europe. Now there's Indo-Pacific Command, which is India and the Pacific. There's North Command, which is the North America continent. There's Southcom, which is the South American continent. Then we have Stratcom, we have Cybercom, and I'm probably forgetting one.
Soon we'll have Marscom.
Because there's 8 of them. But anyway, so that's how the Defense Department divides the world and manages the Defense Department mission with regard to national security. It looks at the globe through regions and has combatant commands responsible for theater security cooperation and operations within those areas of responsibility. The State Department is not organized that way. The State Department has, I think, 4 bureaus, and those 4 bureaus, and I can't even remember what they are. It's been so long for me, but I know there's a Near East Bureau, and I forget the other 3. But because that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does complicate our engagements around the world because, when you have, I don't know, it just complicates things. How about that? And we spend a lot of money on defense assets, and those defense assets can be multi-use platforms. So you can conduct wartime operations with those assets, but you can also conduct humanitarian relief operations with those assets. So in times of disaster, our military can move into position really quickly and help a nation out with regard to airlift or logistics, troops on the ground if they need to be there, and a host of other different military-oriented capabilities. Diplomatic operations are a lot different. One's called hard power, one's called soft power. You're probably familiar with all of that. But what I would say is, in Europe,
we go in swinging a hammer and everything looks like a nail. Is that
kind of, sort of? But yeah, that's a lot of the criticism I heard when I was at that top echelon, that we tend to lead with our military instead of our diplomacy. And I don't know that I would consider that valid, but I heard it a lot. Now,
so NATO should have disbanded around.
I think so.
1990.
I think the mission ended with the USSR's collapse.
So what's happened between now? You mentioned that Russia tried to possibly, they were in talks of joining NATO. You had the PFP. What happened, or what changed, I guess, in 2014? Were we expanding NATO to include Ukraine back then? Kind of, what started with Crimea?
Great question. So first, understand that when the USSR collapsed, okay, you had a bunch of countries in disarray. Okay, you had the Soviet satellites, right? The Warsaw Pact and all those satellites that together made up the Soviet Socialist Republic were now independent of the USSR because the USSR no longer existed. So now you had Russia. At first, they went through a Russian Federation, right, where they tried to loosely maintain some connection, but each nation was on its own regarding the development of its economy, the development of a government that could take care of its people, and so on and so forth. Now, here's another thing to remember. The it's kind of like the difference right now between Iran and the U.S. The U.S. is a nation state, and I'll go back to the Westphalian. I think it was a 1400 agreement, or 500 years old now, so it must have been 1500 or so. The Treaty of Westphalia. The Treaty of Westphalia established nation states. Okay, allowed countries, or I guess the countries that signed on to that treaty, grew boundaries, and they no longer were duchies or fiefdoms or lordships or whatever. They actually now drew boundaries, and those boundaries were respected by bordering countries or nations. Okay. The other thing it did was establish the citizen as the sole purpose of the nation state, the welfare of the citizen. Okay. So you look at a country like Iran. Iran is a revolution. It doesn't care about its people. All right. It cares about preserving the revolution and driving that revolution to an end state. That's kind of what the Soviet Socialist Republic was. The USSR was all about the Politburo, was all about the communist state, right? The people were not a concern so long as they were contributing to the USSR's might and existence. Okay, when that crumbled, then all those countries that had joined together in that to create that USSR needed to re-identify and redefine themselves. They need to establish a government, declare themselves a nation state, define themselves a government that could take care of its citizens, develop an economy that worked for the prosperity and the welfare of its citizens.
Form alliances, trade partners.
Something, they had to build their own way, because they no longer had the big Politburo, the big Communist Party, dictating to them the terms of their existence. Right. And so I think they had the Russian Federation. So they went from the USSR to the Russian Federation to every man for yourself. Russia became its own country. Then you had, the Latvia and all the Baltic states became independent. And then you had Poland and Czechoslovakia and all the stands, Turkmenistan, and all those countries became independent. And so, now, so your enemy shrunk, basically. NATO's big enemy, which was the USSR, now became 13 individual countries. Not all of them had the intent of operating outside their border, right? And so clearly the NATO mission ended. There was nothing more to defend Europe against. And so let me see if there's something else I want to see. Have you ever heard of the Budapest Agreement?
Tell everyone what it is.
I'm going to mention this now because I might forget it. When the Soviet Union crumbled, and I don't know if the Russian Federation was involved then, was existing then or not, but when the USSR crumbled, guess where all of the Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles were?
Where?
They were in Ukraine.
Okay.
And so
did Russia ever get them back? Are they still there?
They did. Okay. They did. So we had a meeting. The world had a meeting. I don't know if it was the world, but it was a global meeting, I think, a meeting of some significance in Budapest. And in the margins of that Budapest agreement that all the parties signed on to, the United States, France, and Britain signed on to incorporate Ukraine under the U.S. nuclear umbrella so that it could feel safe returning to Russia all of the old USSR nuclear tipped ballistic missiles. Okay. So under the Budapest Agreement, Ukraine transferred all of the USSR missiles back into Russia. Okay. And as a part of that agreement, Russia said no more NATO expansion. Okay. Yes, I'll let the nuclear umbrella from US cover Ukraine, but that does not mean that we allow more members more folks that used to be part of the USSR into NATO. NATO stays where it is.
Mm-hmm.
And
how many people have we added to NATO since then?
A bunch. So there's a cable. So the State Department uses cables. If you remember WikiLeaks, Chelsea Manning, I think he was the first one to corrupt the system and I think capture a whole bunch of State Department secret cables and publish them on what became WikiLeaks. One of those cables, or maybe it was after that, I can't remember, but the State Department communicates through cables. One cable was written by, oh gosh, if we'd have had this conversation a year ago, this would all be fresh in my mind. I can't remember who it was. I think William Burns. He became the CIA director, or maybe he was the CIA director at the time. But anyway, it's famous. It's called, it's titled Niet, means Niet. So N-Y-E-T is the Russian for no.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
No
Niet means
no.
Niet, yeah, no means no. And what he was writing was back to the U.S. administration that basically said, all right, look, Russia said that their red line is a eastern expansion of NATO. They won't tolerate it. I think it was James Baker that helped negotiate elements of the Budapest Agreement, but I could be wrong on that. But anyway, several times Russia has said, even though we think, and most of the world thinks, that the NATO mission ended, we'll allow it to exist as long as it doesn't move closer to our eastern border. Okay. And every time we say, okay, great, got it, we move NATO closer to the eastern border of Russia.
Do you think that that's possibly the military industrial complex lobbying to keep conflict escalated and to keep tensions high? Or is it just so that they can add more customers to their belt of people they're selling weapons to? Or is it a combination of both? Or
I think it's a combination of both. So there's a recent conversation between Tucker Carlson and a guy named Mike Halperin.
Okay.
I don't know what you think about either one of those guys, but I met Mike Halperin once when the boss I was working for was a speaker at an event in DC, and Halperin was in the audience. This was probably 2012, I think. Anyway, nice guy. He is a political junkie. He is an electorate expert, and he was ostracized from the liberal media because he refused to become a victim of Trump derangement syndrome. Not that he likes Trump, not that he favors Trump, but he is a traditional journalist who tries to contain his bias and keep his bias under wraps. He tries to report the news as it is, and he's expertly connected. I mean, this guy's political network is unbelievable. But he has this conversation with Tucker about the current election. And in it, they start talking about NATO. And Tucker says some things about NATO that I've always said, but for the first time I heard him spoken at the level of Tucker's prominence. And it is, having served in the U.S. military, I'm always fascinated by these countries that host U.S. military bases. We don't have a foreign military base in the United States, and we wouldn't allow it.
No. Can you imagine how many people's heads would explode if we're like, well, we're just going to let Italy land a few planes over there in Texas? And
yeah. I mean, it is an experience to serve on a U.S. military base in a foreign national's host country, in a foreign national country. Okay, it's got to do something to the psyche, because you've got these military people that aren't, that aren't your nationality, shopping in your grocery stores and going to your malls and staying in your hotels and eating dinners at your restaurants. Sometimes they're in uniform, sometimes they're not, but you definitely know whether they're in uniform or not. You definitely know they are not.
You're competing with them on dating apps, even.
Well, I mean, I don't know about that because I've been married the whole time, but it's got to be weird. I don't know how I would feel. My wife just took our family out to dinner. I don't know how I would feel sitting in a restaurant, looking across the restaurant and seeing a bunch of what I could tell are service members that aren't my countrymen. And I would say, oh yeah, I know those guys are from the local base just down the street. I mean, that's weird. That's got to deal. That's got to be wearing on the national psyche, And so we're all over the place. I mean, we're in Germany, we're in Korea.
To be fair, I do think that the Mexican cartels have a pretty good military setup here in America right now. But so 2014, we've expanded NATO since 1990. Just slowly and progressively expanded it. What happened in 2014 that is still connected? Was it just NATO expansion, or was it that they wanted access to the trade routes? What was?
So I'm not sure what you're getting at, but I remember 2014 as the first of the color revolutions. I think that was the Orange Revolution, the Maidan, Maidan, Maidan Revolution. So I was at Navy War College at the time. Imagine that, right? An Air Force guy at Navy War College. But I was up in Rhode Island, and I remember that was when the Ukrainians, I think at the time, were deciding whether to more closely align with Russia or petition to join the EU. And as I know it, we had a problem with that. We being the United States, specifically folks in the State Department, had a real big problem with the Ukrainians courting agreements with Putin, with Russia.
Probably the same way that Russia doesn't want NATO to expand. NATO doesn't want Russia to expand. It's not exactly the same, but
again,
nobody wants to see the other person.
Why not?
Well,
it wasn't a military agreement. It was an economic cooperation agreement. I mean, that's all the EU is.
Yeah,
is an economic alliance, an economic union, right? I mean, it's not they don't have a military, so it's all economics and I mean, I guess now they're starting to expand, or maybe they have been always interested in the social constructs throughout the members of the EU, but primarily it was to unite the economies of the different states, the different member states throughout the EU, because it was through economics that most of your military conflict started, right?
Yeah, I'm just curious as to how maybe we had a misconnect there. How does that tie into Crimea exactly?
So, well, okay. So if the Ukraine was going to join the EU, then the next step would be to become a NATO partner. Okay.
Okay. So that was.
And Russia has Sevastopol, which is their Black Sea Fleet headquartered in Crimea. Okay. There was absolutely no way they were going to allow Ukraine, with Crimea still a part of it, there was no way they were going to allow their Black Sea Fleet headquarters, their main port on the Black Sea, to be part of the NATO coalition.
Gotcha.
So that, I guess, what they did at that time, it was a brilliant cyber operation, because I think they They ended up blinding the Ukrainians, then sending the little green men across the border. Nobody knew what was going on, and before you knew it, Russia stood up and planted the flag and said, "This peninsula is now my peninsula."
Yeah.
And they annexed it and controlled it. I think that was the Maidan Revolution, which was the start of the color revolutions, which is a technique that our special forces developed regarding the overthrow of government. So I think the special forces guys cooperated with the CIA, and it's something that is now sort of I think not supposed to be talked about much, but yeah. So the 2014 Maidan Revolution.
Why
And
do you say that that we had something to do with that? I mean, it might be well known, but just is that just a little inside knowledge or speculation or?
yeah, our State Department. Well, this is leading up to. Well, okay. So there's a breadcrumb trail. It starts with the color revolution. It starts actually before that. But it goes through the Maidan Revolution, the 2014 Russia annexing Crimea, to Joe Biden going over there and saying, you need to get rid of
The prosecutor.
the prosecute. Yeah, all of that. The State Department is all over it. And in particular, I think if you go and do some Googling, look up the name Victoria Nuland,
Mm-hmm.
Nuland, Vicki Nuland, and her husband Kaplan, Kaplan, are war hawks. They very much see the U.S. as the global power and the world's policeman. And there's a belief. Okay, so when the USSR crumbled, the world it used to be multipolar or bipolar, right? So you had two world superpowers. You had the US and you had the USSR. When the USSR collapsed, you had a unipolar world. You had just the United States as the world's lone superpower. Okay. Tucker talks about this a little bit with Mike Halperin, which is kind of, they try and explain why the Cheneys went off the rail here over Trump and are now supporting Kamala Harris. It's not about Kamala's politics. It's not about Trump's domestic policy issues. It's how Trump sees the world. It's how I see the world. It's how people like me and Trump and a couple others see the world with regard to the U.S.'s position in it. Okay. I do not believe we need to be the world's policeman. I do not believe that we need to station our U.S. military all over the world like we are. I think it's provocative. I think it's also risky. And I think it's demeaning to the populations that we inhabit that host us. And I think there are studies that reveal that the suicide rates in Japan are largely attributable to the national identity crisis that's created from our U.S. presence over there. After World War II, we drafted the Japanese Constitution. They live. The Japanese nation is pretty much subordinate to the United States.
Well, it's amazing how their culture, has basically turned into anime and video games and tech. And I know that there's a lot, but that's what we see of Japan over here. It's the funny shaped little head cartoon characters, the vending machines where you can get literally everything, and all the best video games. but that's not what you think of when you think of traditional Japan.
Yeah. Have you been there?
I have not. No.
Yeah. So I've been there, and it's quite a developed citizenry. The population, the culture, very refined, highly technical, very capable, dedicated, disciplined, and appreciative. It's got to be so hard that they are only allowed to have a constitution that doesn't allow them to develop a military in their image. They can't. So if they, as a country, feel threatened, or so in defense, in military parlance, or in military thinking, military operations, offense and defense are they cannot be separated. If you're going to do defensive operations, you have to have offensive operations as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you're conducting offensive operations, defensive operations are a part of that. So we, post World War II, imposed ourselves, the United States imposed itself on the development of Japan post World War II, partly out of punishment for what it started over there, right? To the conqueror goes the spoils. So we told them what kind of constitution they can develop. So today, the threat environment over there is very different from the world as it was presented leading into World War II. Japan is no longer the most powerful country in the Pacific, not even close. And yet, if they feel like they need offensive capabilities, the way we've constructed their constitution, they have to come ask us if they can modify their constitution to allow them to build in offensive capabilities into their military.
I think that's not the only country we've made that arrangement with, is it? Or
I'm pretty sure.
Okay. I know that a lot of are part of NATO. I guess some of the benefit is that we foot all the bill for it, so that they don't have to have as much. I know that's different, but I imagine that we supplement a lot of people's security.
So we do, but NATO, we are not. The NATO alliance is not designed to be run by the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It is supposed to be an equal partnership. Every nation contributes 2% of its GDP to the alliance. Now, that's going to be a disproportionate amount regarding the U.S.'s contribution, because our GDP
is higher. Mm-hmm.
is the number one GDP in the world. Our economy is the world's largest.
When I say they, though, I mean, I don't think any of us believe that Joe Biden or that Kamala Harris or that half of these political decisions that are made. I think a lot of people acknowledge some form of a shadow type government. And if that's the case, wouldn't the powers that be probably be the powers that be over both organizations, or, over the U.S. government and over NATO, or at least some of the same overlapping special interests like the military industrial complex? Is that?
So, yes, by being a partner in an alliance, you are agreeing to relieve yourself of some sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You have to, in order to be a partner with other nations. So in the United States, in NATO's case, because we have up until recently, I guess, we had the world's largest economy. So 2% of that gross domestic product was probably 2 or 3 times any other NATO nation's contribution. So if it's our assets, we're going to selfishly want to control them and employ them and integrate them, demanding that everybody we're the big dog. We're the elephant in the room. We're the big dog on the block. You got to learn how to connect to us. It's our research and development that are going to push these platforms forward. And you, Germany, France, UK, and Italy, Greece, all you guys have to learn how to connect with us, because NATO is just one theater that we operate in. We are a global military that can operate in many theaters. So what operates for us in NATO must also operate for us in the Indo-Pacific AOR, in the Southcom AOR, and in the EUCOM, the CENTCOM AOR. So by the preponderance of force or contribution or size of the contribution, we probably are the primary decision maker in these regions. But even if that's justified by our contribution or understandable,
that doesn't mean that it should be our role.
That's right. That's right. Imagine, and so I think what we saw in the late 90s and the 2000s was, these European countries were like, well, look, let's approach Russia differently. Russia is not the USSR. It doesn't have, so when you look at the employment of a country's military instrument of power, you normally look at the order of battle. And if you looked at the Russian order of battle versus the USSR order of battle, so much smaller, so much less capable. The USSR, because it had 13 or 14 or 15 satellite nations within it, had a globally deployable force.
People, everything.
Yes. Russia is not the USSR, so their economy is much smaller. Their footprint is still big because they are,
And NATO, or the military industrial complex, couldn't have that. So is that they started to expand what in the 90s, 2000s? What is that what kind of sparked the expansion, or was that just another thing happening at the same time?
So one of the oddest moments for me was when Mitt Romney was castigated for calling Russia a threat. And you remember Obama, when they were campaigning, Obama said, hey, the 1980s called and wants their military foreign policy back, or something like that.
Yeah.
You remember that? And so Romney was they laughed him out of the House because
it was a zinger moment, almost like the she'd be in jail. Not
that's right.
Quite as good, but
that's right. So I don't remember, what was that, 2008 or was that 2012? That was 12. Okay, so what happened from 2012 to Ukraine?
Well, we could have never seen that coming because it wouldn't have looked good on TV if we had been honest.
So you have Obama, candidate for president in 2012, telling Mitt Romney Russia isn't a threat, and makes a big joke about it and destroys the Romney candidacy. Okay, then he's in, and then they you have that secret lean-to where he says to Medvedev, right? Just tell Putin that I'll have more freedom to maneuver after the election, right? So there was no idea that Russia was this threat. Remember, Hillary handed the big red button to Sergei Lavrov and said, we're going to hit the reset here. So something happened from 2012 to what?
February 2014, when they invaded Crimea.
Well, in 16, all of a sudden, Russia compromised Trump.
Yeah.
Right. And Trump was this Manchurian candidate, right? And they played that Russian hoax thing for what, 2 years or so?
Some people are still playing it.
Right. Yeah. So if you put all the, they left us crumbs, and if you put it all together, they created Russia as the boogeyman. And Putin's just sitting out here going, what the hell?
All we've asked you is not to expand NATO.
Right. Now, I'm not a Putin apologist, okay? I am not a fan of Putin. I'm not a Putin apologist, but I understand the dude is smart. He's not an idiot.
I don't like snakes, but if I kept poking a water moccasin with a stick and it bit me, I wouldn't blame it.
Yeah. I mean, so people will say, well, Putin, I think Glenn Beck made a big deal about this guy he called Putin's brain. And that guy wrote some books and I think is a big ideologue with regard to recreating the Soviet Union, not necessarily through a construct of satellite states, but in terms of power and influence. He wants to bring back, he wants to recreate a multipolar global structure where the United States has a peer in a Russian superpower that it doesn't have today. And so they point to that and they say, gosh, look, so he does have imperialistic viewpoints, or he does have an ambition to recreate the old USSR. And I don't think so, because to go from where they are to what they say they want is going to take a lot, and they're not doing a damn thing to move in that direction. Okay, so instead, what they were doing was building relationships within Europe. They had one natural resource that was valued outside its borders, and that was natural gas. They've got hordes of it, right? And so Angela Merkel built or agreed to have that Nord Stream pipeline built. They were building Nord Stream 2, and Trump went over there and called him out on it, right? Because at the time, they wanted to build this Russian boogeyman. And he said, well, they're not the boogeyman. I mean, you're dependent on them for more than half your energy.
Was that a conversation with like Germany and
yeah. Why are you going to despair?
Oh, we lost him. Oh, here he comes. Hold on. All right. Had an internet hiccup. So
no worries. But anyway, so Trump called him out on it and said, well, on the one hand, you're developing friendly relations and you're developing dependencies on them with regard to your energy needs. But then you're trying to tell me that Russia is the enemy and we need to build up military capability so we can go to war with them. What is it? And then, by the way, not only are you developing these energy dependencies on them, but you haven't been contributing your 2% to NATO forever because you recognize the NATO alliance is no longer useful. It's no longer applicable. The mission of NATO ended. So why don't we just be honest, do away with the military alliance because it's provocative, and we haven't done anything but expand NATO and move it closer to the Russian border. Meanwhile, you're trying to make friends with Russia by building dependencies on their natural resources, specifically their gas. I read something the other day that the blowing up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline raised the price of a kilowatt hour in Germany something like 200 and something percent. And so, there's only, the GDP of Germany, the economy is only so big. So you have to, they subsidize a lot of the citizenry, a lot of the utilities over there are subsidized. They have to be. Germany either pours a lot of money into renewables like solar. I used to live near this 30-acre solar plant. It used to be farmland, and then they converted the farm field. They bought the farmer off. They paid him a lot of money, and they took that land and they put solar panels all over it. Germany is famous for its its wind turbines.
So who blew up the pipeline?
So there's only a few countries that could have done that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it was deep water pipeline, and it took some significant explosives. And speculation is that it was the Ukrainians. But I can tell you that the Ukrainian military, even the special forces, did not have that capability.
Is it possible that we lent them some people or trained some people for that?
Yes, we probably could have trained some people for that. But I'm not sure that was an act of war.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure Ukraine was ready for that type of engagement at the time. So remember, this whole thing between Ukraine and Russia started because Russia was tired of the Eastern breakaway republics inside Ukraine, right? So at first it was an internal squabble. There were some ethnic Russians living in the Donbas region in the southeast corner of Ukraine, and they were trying to break away and establish an independent sector within Ukraine. And the Ukrainians were fighting them, trying to prevent the separatists from winning. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then Russia said, hey, I don't, that's your business. The problem is it's on my border. And kind of like what Mao told Stalin back in 1950 or 51, he says, I don't like you and I don't need to like you. But if you screw with me, I'm just going to send 500,000 of my people across the border into your country every day for a month. And then you will collapse because you won't be able to support them. Right? As refugees, you couldn't take care of them. Your government would collapse. That's kind of what Putin was telling Ukraine. Hey, all this fighting that's going on is sending people across the border. They're coming across and robbing me of resources, robbing my cities and my communities of resources, and going back into your country and fighting your military. So figure it out, put the fire out. So there were two agreements, Minsk I and Minsk II, right? And those were designed to stop the fighting. Which
mean the factions in Ukraine.
Yes. Angela Merkel came out, I think, in 2022 in Der Spiegel, and admitted that those two agreements, Minsk I and Minsk II, were bullshit. They were merely roadblocks, allowing NATO to build Ukraine's resources up so it could go to war with Russia. And so, again, if you think about it, the narrative is that Russia invaded Ukraine with the idea it was going to conquer Ukraine and eventually annex the country into Russia.
In hopes of recreating the old USSR. That's the, okay.
Yeah.
And then.
Yeah. And we had a bunch of people, supposedly smart people, running to the TV airwaves and telling us that this was an invasion and that, we needed to counter this, else Russia would topple Ukraine and never stop, keep going. Next would be Poland. Next would be,
soon you'd have gas chambers again.
That was all bullshit.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why it was bullshit. Because from the start, okay, when you are, it's what we did when we went into Iraq. The first thing we did was go after command and control. If you can't command and control your military, then your military is a sitting duck, right? And so the first thing you try and attack, you go after their centers of gravity, right? And one of the main centers of gravity is your main C2 node, your command and control node. All right. They never attacked Zelensky. Hell, Zelensky was getting on a plane and flying to the U.S. all the time. He was on TV, right?
Yeah, we've been sending people over to Kyiv or Kiev, whatever I don't know what you're supposed to say this day of the week, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So it was always, from Russia's standpoint, what I call limited military operation. They called it, I think, a strategic military, an SMO, but it was a limited military engagement.
With specific
Or
goals,
yeah,
more precision than
right,
just
right.
blow it all
It was designed to stop the fighting along the border and secure that region so that, there were no more incursions across the border. It spared the communities in that eastern province of Russia from the conflicts that were going on in Ukraine. We would do the same thing. Trump wants to deploy the military to the southern border. Why? Because it's a porous border, and the communities down there are dying. People are dying. So you want to send your military to the borders to secure the border so that your people can live in peace, right? And that's the same thing Russia did with Ukraine.
So I have to ask, you mentioned the Joe Biden telling him that, hey, you got to get rid of that prosecutor. I'm not going to give you any of that money. Most of the world knows about Hunter Biden and Burisma. Was that relationship, do you think, influenced or put together by the State Department or the CIA or somebody, some three-letter agency? And I ask that because Devin Archer was on an episode of Tucker Carlson probably 6-8 months ago, and he was another board member for Burisma, and he said that most of those moves are put together by like a giant law firm and consulting firms and things like that. And I just imagine that those giant law firms and consulting firms are probably in some way connected to the intelligence agencies.
So there's not. All right, I'll tell you. I'll answer that question this way. In every, I talked to you. There's four instruments of national power, right? Diplomacy, information, military, and economics. Dime. Okay. And the way the United States, the way most nations use their diplomatic instrument is through embassies and consulates. Okay. In every U.S. embassy, there is a chief of mission. So there's the ambassador, right? And the State Department staff that supports the ambassador. And there's also the chief of mission. Do you know who the chief of mission works for?
I imagine he's a spy.
The CIA. Yeah. So my last let's not go there. Every time a foreign military member leaves to come into the U.S., so we do what we call theater security cooperation. Okay, we sell millions, billions of dollars of weaponry to other countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia. One thing I'll mention about Israel is we sell the same weapons to Egypt and Saudi Arabia that we sell to Israel. The difference, though, is that by law, the weapons we send to Israel have to allow them to maintain a qualitative military edge or advantage, a QME, we call it a QME. So if we sell an F-16 to Israel and we sell an F-16 to Egypt,
we got to put laser beams on one of them instead of.
The difference is in the blocks, which are the upgrades or abilities of that F-16. Same aircraft, but different capabilities, right? So with regard to in that theater security cooperation mission, and then in the foreign military sales and foreign military financing that we offer all of these foreign partners, these nation states, when they come over to the U.S. to train and learn how to use or employ or maintain those weapon systems, that chief of mission knows every one of those, Bubbas.
Mm-hmm.
Not one single foreign military soldier or airman or Navy person comes into the U.S. without the chief of mission, without the CIA and the State Department knowing who that nation sent. We have a dossier on them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they could be, a cook, but it doesn't matter. We know who they are, and we know more about them because they are leaving their country and coming into ours. Okay, so going back to Hunter Biden, there's probably nothing that Hunter did with regard to these foreign engagements that our government didn't know about.
So, just in your opinion, do you think that they set it up or orchestrated it, or were they just observing behind the two-way mirror per se?
So it's hard to tell. One thing I will say is this idea that the government is some extremely intelligent entity is complete horseshit.
It's my interpretation. Never attribute to malice what can be easily explained by incompetence, and most of what we deal with is incompetence. But one thing I do notice, some of the strategic people and the people in positions of strategy are able to manipulate circumstances, and I think they do try to what extent they're successful. I think it's very once it involves too many people that aren't capable of making decisions themselves, if that makes sense. If you are not the string puller,
All right,
then it becomes more difficult.
Let me give you a great example. So, you ever heard the name Ben Rhodes?
I've heard the name, but
okay, worked for Obama.
Okay.
Ended up becoming President Obama's national security advisor, or he was a close advisor, very, very close advisor to President Obama. Not sure if I think it was Susan Rice, who was the NSA. So Ben was the deputy to Susan Rice.
Okay.
You know what? You think Ben, as the president's deputy national security advisor, you would think Ben has some national security chops, right? That he comes from, I don't know, the CIA or the State Department, or comes from the military or something.
Yeah, was the guy tracking Snowden or something like that? Yeah.
You know how Ben came in contact with Obama? So Ben graduated, I think he graduated, I'm not sure if it was an Ivy League school or if it was NYU. But anyway, he came out of one of those Northeast highly reputable universities, and he tried to sell some manuscripts. He wanted to be a book writer. And so he wrote 2 novels and tried to sell them to some publishing houses, and they were rejected. So he couldn't go unemployed. So he ended up joining, I think it was Patrick Moynihan's staff. So his parents were pretty reputable and wealthy, and they contacted the senator. Hey, my son graduated. He's kind of struggling, but he's a good writer. He's written a couple of manuscripts, hopes to get them sold. Can he join your staff? Do you need him? Can you help him? And so, Patrick said, yep, I'll bring him on as a speechwriter. I always need speechwriters, so I'll bring him on as a speechwriter. So what happens when a senator decides to pop out from the group and become a candidate for president? Other senators want to contribute to that senator's effort so that if that guy gets into the White House, they've got an in, right?
Yeah.
So Obama, the junior senator from Illinois, decides he's going to run for president. Moynihan says, oh, you need candidate staff, because your Senate staff still needs to, he held on to his office,
job,
right?
and
They still, yeah. So I will contribute this speechwriter I just hired that isn't worth a shit, but I'll give him to you and you can put him on your candidate staff, right? So Ben Rhodes goes over to the junior senator from Illinois, President or
Senator Obama.
Yeah, Senator Obama, who is competing in the primaries to become the candidate, the Dem candidate for president in 2007, and then Obama wins, and Ben now is in the White House. Holy cow! He's in the White House, and he's in the White House press office as, I think, the deputy to the deputy press secretary. Okay.
Still.
So through, Ben's unmarried and he's a smart kid and he's young, right? So through attrition, he's now gaining seniority, right? Everybody in the White House, they can only last about a year because the pace is and the stress is so intense. So everybody goes and back to their families and does their things. Ben rises up, and the next thing you know, he is Obama's press secretary. And then Obama likes him and moves him over into become the deputy national security advisor, deputy NSA. Ben had no national security or foreign policy chops at all. None. Zip. And that guy, is the one that convinced Obama to relax the sanctions on Cuba. Remember when Obama did that?
Mm-hmm.
Said, hey, Cuba, Castro's old. We've been trying this same approach for 40 years. Let's do something different. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Let's switch this and let's relax our sanctions against Cuba. So that guy is the one that was doing all of that. And my point goes back to the government is full of idiots. Mm-hmm. Now, there are some smart people. Okay. There are some smart people. I think
that there's smart people that know how to manipulate the idiots.
Maybe.
That's where, and I see it even at a local level, where the people who hold these office positions a lot of the time know just enough to get themselves in trouble or be dangerous. But some of the people behind the scenes that are involved in multiple campaigns, the strategists, the people whose names you never hear, those people are holding on to information and releasing it at opportune times so I imagine that just happens on a much more expensive scale. Do you think that the numbers we're getting are accurate in terms of the number of deaths that are being reported? I know you said that Ukraine doesn't have a chance of winning. I'm of the same opinion, but if you watch, CNBC, you would think that they're just a couple of days away and they're gonna take Moscow.
Yeah, that's baloney. So Ukraine is so desperate for soldiers that it's now going into theaters and restaurants and looking for military age males and confiscating them, arresting them, and pushing them into compulsory service. They initially had an agreement, I think, with Germany, Poland, and Hungary, maybe the Czech Republic, that any Ukrainian males that stayed in their countries for more than a week would be, they'd call them out to Ukraine, and Ukraine would go get them and compel them to service. Ukraine can't win. It couldn't win at the start of this. No matter how much firepower NATO gave it, it couldn't win. It doesn't have the military sophistication. It doesn't have the resources. It doesn't have the economy. It couldn't win. Ukraine could never beat Russia. And so it was ridiculous from the start, which means, okay, so why then was there so much energy and effort put into Ukraine? Well, I can tell you the first thing that we did was we exhausted all of our old military supplies. So we gave Ukraine all of our crap.
Mm-hmm. And we have to replace it.
You're right. And so those were some of the budgets passed, or some of the bills passed that were in the hundreds of millions of dollars, really went to defense contractors to build more weapons to replace the antiquated, outdated ones that we gave to Ukraine. Then we started promising things that became a lot more provocative, like F-16s. And we never, I don't know, did we promise them A1s, M1A1s? I'm not sure. I think we did.
I feel like, I don't know if we did, but somebody.
Well, Germany promised a bunch of their tanks, but they never delivered them. I think they delivered like 6. And the rest that they promised, they never delivered, because afterwards they said, it's kind of ridiculous. It's a lost cause. Ukraine will never win. So no, we're not going to. A lot of things these people say, they just kind of support the narrative, but then they go back to their people behind the scenes and they give completely different answers. And so, it was a corrupt effort to start. I think a lot of what we were doing was covering for some of that corruption. Our corporate media doesn't do a fair job of reporting. Like right now, it's almost impossible to get information out of the Middle East. We're not getting anything on the Israel issue with the Gaza and the Lebanese. So you just have to know what's going on and read between the lines and have the experience to see sort of the real picture. A lot of these guys that went on TV, a lot of these military dudes that went on TV and said, "Oh yeah, Ukraine can win and Ukraine's going to be able to do this and do that." They were lying. They were flat out lying, and they knew it.
Speaking of people who went on TV to talk about Ukraine, I have to ask what your take is on Ryan Ruth, or Ralph, or however you pronounce his last name, the second Trump assassination guy. He was seen in a recruiting video for the Azov battalion or the brigade or something like that.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Is he a State Department guy, or is he just some poor sap that they've roped in?
I think, okay. So I've said this before, probably not on the radio, but to me, it was pretty evident that the government, not Biden or Obama, but the government was not going to allow Trump back into the White House. Okay. He is too dangerous to them. And what I mean by that is, and I wrote a paper on this, and if I can get it to where I want it, I'll probably send it to you. So you ever heard of the USAID?
No.
USAID. USAID is a giant organization within the State Department. And there's a woman named Samantha Power who's the director. Okay. She was Obama's ambassador to the United Nations. Now we're going to get off Ukraine here for a minute, but it is all tied in. Mm-hmm. Okay. So Samantha Power wrote a paper, I think she's a Yale graduate, very, very, very smart woman. Wrote her doctoral dissertation on the responsibility to protect. So nations like the United States, the all-powerful superpower United States, has an obligation to protect the oppressed and the prosecuted within the third world. Okay. And so that became the basis for our invasion of Libya. Mm-hmm. Okay. The R2P mission set, the responsibility to protect mission set. Okay. She and Obama, the story is that Ben Rhodes knew of Samantha Power and introduced candidate Obama to Samantha Power, and candidate Obama spent all night with Samantha Power as she explained her philosophy, her perspective on U.S. as a superpower with regard to global security. Okay. And he was enamored with her and her idea. And so he brought her into his administration as the ambassador to the UN. Well, she did that. And then when Trump took over, she left and became a think tank person. And then when Biden came in, he appointed her the director of USAID. USAID is supposed to be spreading U.S. peace and love throughout the world. Okay. Really, what it's doing is spearheading globalism. Okay. It is spearheading multiculturalism and globalism. It is developing the new world order as we speak. That is USAID. Okay. So you have the UN, and they come up with their SDGs, which they just came out with a new one. And I can't remember what the SDG acronym, strategic something goal.
Developmental goals, or
Yeah, there you go. Strategic developmental goal. They came out for one for 2030, right? And then underneath the UN's SDGs, now you have your WEF, your World Economic Forum, your World Economic Council, your IMF, your International Monetary Fund, and your Bilderberg Group. You have all those guys. They coordinate. Okay, here's the SDG. Here's how we're going to build the infrastructure to effect or realize those SDGs. And then those go down, and then it all teardrops down. And what's sitting on top of all of that is the USAID. Okay. And so I think that the reason Russia is now the boogeyman is because the two world powers that are completely averse and against globalism are Russia and China. And so Putin will never accept multiculturalism, and he will never accept globalism, because it means you have to relinquish your sovereignty in order to become part of a new world order. He's just not going to do that.
That's not compatible. And what I want to kind of convey to people that are watching this is that mentality is not compatible with even the supervillain bad guy version of Putin that, I think most people acknowledge. Just because you say a lot of this was started because of NATO expansion and all of that doesn't make Putin a good guy, but it makes it, like you said, it's incompatible having someone with that big of an ego, or who wants to expand Russia and wants to have some kind of power, for him to share that with someone.
Yeah. So
I don't think Trump wants to share it either, just to be fair.
Well, let me say this. When I speak Putin, I'm really talking Russia. As a United States citizen, we are really underdeveloped with regard to our global knowledge. And that's intentional. Okay, that is intentional. The less we know, the easier we are to control, right, by a government developed narrative. Okay, so unless you get beyond the nation's borders and you actually go into these countries and you learn about them and you see what their value systems are and you see how they develop their children into adults who become their leaders, right? And not only in the government, but in the business world, what we know sitting here in the state of Tennessee is but a very, very small fraction of what we should know. And so when I say Putin, I'm really talking Russia. Nobody knows. Can you name another government or leader in Russia outside of Putin?
No, at one point I could, because I was watching the updates on Telegram, but it was only in my brain for like a week. And that's, I don't know anything other than what we're fed. I do see the statements that he makes as a politician that make it over here. And I haven't seen a whole lot to fault him over, especially, if it were my backyard that's happening in. That doesn't mean that I'm a Putin defender or anything, but I almost wonder if the reason everyone, you have to preface everything you say with that, especially in media, is if they've done the same thing to Putin as they have Trump, bald man bad or orange man bad, Russian man bad. I don't, I don't, obviously I've heard enough to know that he's probably a very ruthless military leader and has some different ways of maintaining power, but that's like you said, that's more Russia. That would be a cultural thing, wouldn't it? If he left tomorrow and somebody took his place, they'd probably maintain that level of ruthlessness.
I don't know that he's ruthless at all.
Yeah.
I know that he is adept at handling the the political environment inside the country that he leads.
Mm-hmm.
I also know that if he wasn't acceptable, they probably would, they being the Russian power brokers, would determine or install a new leader using whatever mechanism they have, whether it's by vote or whether it's by gun or whatever, but it's the same for President Xi and China. We only know of President Xi. I don't know any other people in China outside of that one guy by name, because we just, we don't hear it.
And we don't know how their political system works and yeah.
Yeah. Let me say something else about Russia. So I think I started this discussion by telling you that my experience in the highest echelons of national security decision making, I heard a lot that the United States tends to lead with its military instrument of power, and that turns a lot of foreign countries off. And there's reasons for that, like I explained. Here's where I think we are seeing the people like Cheney, who is, there is just no damn way that Dick and Liz Cheney support the most liberal candidate we've ever had run for president.
Yes.
There's just no way. You cannot. It's like drinking poison. It just doesn't happen. But what I think they see is a person in Trump that doesn't necessarily agree with the U.S. established international order that has existed since World War II.
And it's not just the military either. You've also got pharmaceutical industries and other massive industries that have world power also, or world influence.
Yeah, it's the whole foreign policy or foreign presence or international order, whether it be diplomatic, government, military, economic. The international order was established by the U.S. and is upheld by the U.S., which gets us into what we call forever wars, right? We go to war because somebody is attempting to disrupt the international order. And so I think that is what they are scared of when they say that Donald Trump represents the end of democracy as we know it. I don't think he represents the end of democracy. I think he represents a challenge to the perpetuation of the U.S. established international order. In other words, if Trump gets into office and NATO decides that we're going to disband, I think Trump would say, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, save us some money.
You're provocative, reorganize yourselves, find your own ways to develop peaceful relationships. And, we'll move our troops back into the U.S. That'd be great. And I think that is just anathema to the Cheneys of the world, who, the Cheneys, the Newlands.
Do you think that that's going to be, he said that if he's elected, he will end the war. He just wants everyone to stop dying. Do you think that that's might be how he does it? Or do you think he's going to get elected?
So I don't know what your thoughts are on Tucker Carlson, but he does a pretty good job interviewing people, and he had on, like I said, Mark Halperin, and they discuss. Mark Halperin has been studying the electorate and elections for 40 years, and the guy is. I think he tells Tucker that the reason they moved Joe Biden out was because Joe Biden couldn't win. Okay. And they knew it. The internals and the private. So there's two types of polling, right? There's the public polling, which
And
we
there's
get,
intern.
which is cheaply done because it costs money and you got to get it out. It's just to basically, stimulate a public narrative. And then there's the private polling, which actually drives decisions. So in a campaign has three resources it must use effectively: people, money, and time. Okay. And when you are the campaign chairman and you have people, money, and time constraints and restraints that you must manage effectively in order to, have all of them work in favor of winning the election for your candidate, you have to have internal polling data. That's like, as a military operator, I need intelligence. I develop my understanding of my operational environment. I develop my understanding of my objective. And then I turn to my intel troop and I say, I have assumptions here that need to be turned into fact. And as soon as they're turned into fact, I can make informed decisions about what to do. Right. Same for campaign people. They need information. They need facts so that they can make appropriate decisions, so that they use those three critical resources efficiently in plotting a path to a win. So the private polling is more expensive, but it's more accurate, and it's very rarely released to the public. And so what Mark Halperin says is that private polling, the polling done by the people on the inside, showed that Biden couldn't win. Not that Kamala was the better candidate to replace Joe Biden. She was the best available. Given
Best available, and we've seen their big, massive push of propping her up. She was probably easier to prop up than a half-dead corpse.
Maybe by a hair, yeah. She is. I think she's unintelligent. I do. Now, people will say, well, she has a law degree and she was a prosecutor. Well, she failed the bar exam, and she did go to a law school, but it wasn't a prominent law school. It was a very small law school. And sure, a law degree, I mean, that you got to have some intellect, some intelligence.
She can, like we saw in the debate, as long as she's coached and has plenty of time to prepare and it's somewhat scripted, she is much better at that. You can understand the words she says when she's had time to prepare. Now, in a live interview or something that's a little confrontational, now she's maybe a hair better, but is, like you said, of all the available options, do you take the dead duck or the almost dead duck?
Yeah. Well, she's in a weird spot. She doesn't want to offend Biden, right? Because she got there because Biden selected her as her VP. So she's very protective of Biden. Plus, she lied about his deteriorating condition forever. And she only started in politics. I don't know how old she is now, but she didn't register to vote and participate in the electoral process until she was 29 years old. And so she's not a very seasoned, even though she was a senator, she's not a very seasoned politician. So I think you see a lot of indecision. She lacks principles. She lacks depth on policy issues. I think she's in a weird spot. She's uncomfortable. That's what I see. I see a massive amount of discomfort when it comes to Kamala's candidacy. I think she feels like she was forced into this position. Sure, she wants it. I mean, what red-blooded American wouldn't? But I don't think she's comfortable. And because she's not comfortable, there are problems making her into an effective candidate. I think what you're seeing, though, is in the Mark Halperin Tucker Carlson interview, Halperin says it's going to come down to 7 states, and he says some things that are interesting. Either it's going to be close, or Trump will win by a landslide. He can see either happening. Neither would be surprising. He said the Democrats' number one issue is abortion because it's emotional. It is an emotive issue, and it is the number one issue for Democrats. However, all the polling shows that issue lagging behind immigration, inflation, and the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if it's the emotional issues that drive you to the polls. Right.
Republican voter registration is up. All of the trends are pointing towards a Trump victory.
Okay, but here's the important part now. Our presidents are not elected by the popular vote.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it comes down to certain precincts in certain states that will decide the electoral college, those states, and that's the challenge. So Pennsylvania, is a big one. Now she lost a lot of Pennsylvanians with the fracking thing, but then she turned around and said she was going to support fracking. That's not her problem in Pennsylvania. Her problem in Pennsylvania is she's a California liberal.
Yeah.
And the Pennsylvanians, from what I read and what I gather, have a hard time endorsing a California liberal. Nevada, the unions are going to put Nevada behind Kamala, even though Clark County and a couple other districts in Nevada. I hear, I saw Rich Grinnell say that he thinks New Mexico is in play. I don't think so. I think that's blue. I think it comes down to the Great Lakes states, Georgia, Nevada, and Pennsylvania.
I have a slightly different, and this is only mildly educated opinion. Yeah. I think Trump's going to win, but I think you're going to see a few wrenches thrown in the equation down ballot, because when I look at races, not necessarily in Tennessee, with like Marsha Blackburn, Gloria Johnson, that one's not going to be close.
Right.
But the ground game of the left and the amount of notifications that they send out and the way that they will drag you by your hair.
Oh, yeah.
All the way to whatever polling center you need to go to.
Yeah. Now, that is one thing that Halperin said that shocked me. Since Kamala was designated the Dem Party nominee for president, she's raised $1 billion.
Mm-hmm.
In that short time frame, she's raised $1 billion.
Yeah, but $1 billion doesn't go as far as it used to.
Okay, well, great point. All right, so Tucker said $1 billion. Where is she spending it? And he said, Halperin said, yeah, that'll buy you some ads. But her ground game, the Democrat ground game, which is what you're talking about, the get out the vote, right? The surveilling and canvassing of senior citizen facilities, hospitals.
You can get paid $25 an hour right now to read a script over a Zoom call to people in a different state where they need you.
That's right. Well, I guarantee you it was a Democrat operative that went to Jimmy Carter and put a pen in his hand and moved his hand voting for Kamala Harris, because that guy is basically dead.
Yeah.
And it's sad. It's elderly abuse and it's sad, but I guarantee you that's what happened. But anyway, that's what he said. He said that the Democrat ground game has been, for the last 20 years, a hell of a lot better than the Republicans' ground game. And he also said, when Tucker said, where does she get that $1 billion? Was it just rich people writing checks? He said, no, it's through Act Blue. Mm-hmm. Now, I've been saying for years that Act Blue is a foreign money bundler and distributor. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why somebody with a Republican backbone, maybe there aren't any, has not tried to deconstruct Act Blue. Instead, they've tried to build their own Act Blue, which is Win Red, right? But that's not the point. It's not a donation mechanism through which you capture the donor's information so that you can develop a list that then you can sell, monetize and then sell. That's not what Act Blue does. Act Blue takes foreign money and then matches that against a whole bunch of fictitious donors, and then makes those donors small contributions to the candidates. And it therefore, what do you call that? Money laundering. It launders that foreign policy money into the pockets or into the campaigns of these Democrat candidates. And I know one guy finally filed a lawsuit because his name appeared as an Act Blue donor donating to Kamala Harris, and he's a Republican. And so I know he filed a lawsuit, and maybe that lawsuit will be the beginning of the deconstruction or destruction of Act Blue. But that's how they do it.
I know that James O'Keefe, there's a lot of other people looking into Act Blue. The one thing that I've always been curious, because I'm not obviously an accountant or anything like that. I'm not a forensic auditor. But I'm curious because everyone uses Act Blue. And when you look at the ground game as someone who tries to go undercover in some of these and stay up to date with what these other organizations are doing, they are much, 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 much better than the right at the ground game. And all of their ground game all of their money donation links all go through Act Blue. They encourage you. I was undercover inside like a Planned Parenthood group, and through that, I'm on a Georgia thing. I'm on like 3 or 4 different, they just pass your email on. And I've seen a lot of the social justice warrior crowd, all the people that were down there for the BLM marches in Nashville when Cooper invited, 15,000 people out there. Those people all gave $10 of their mama's money to anyone who asked them to help stop police violence. They probably didn't know. And I'm curious to see how much of Act Blue's is genuine money laundering versus the actual ground game, because it's obvious it's not all foreign influence. Obviously, you have to have a legitimate business if you're going to wash money in it. And I'm just curious as to how much of the billions of dollars that they process each year is foreign, and how much of their advertising campaigns is done with possibly foreign influence or foreign intelligence, or, any number of the cyber issues with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the idea that, it's foolish to think that, our adversaries and our allies have no interest in our elections.
Oh, 100%.
We
would never interfere with anyone else's elections.
No, never mind that 100-person team that Obama deployed to take out Netanyahu.
Yep.
I mean, that was not an effort to influence elections.
Forget Gaddafi. We didn't have anything to do with that either. No, that's not really an election, but
no. Or their surveillance of Chancellor Merkel's private cell phone. We didn't want to do anything to influence her reelection.
We didn't have a FISA warrant on a presidential candidate. No.
So that is insane, actually. So have you ever heard of posse comitatus?
Yes.
Okay, so that means your domestic intelligence and law enforcement cannot mix with your foreign intelligence and military engagements. So posse comitatus was this giant wall, and back in the 9/11 Commission, they determined that some of the blame lay on our reliance on posse comitatus. And so they started to pierce holes in that barrier. right? And that's when you came up with the Patriot Act, and the Patriot Act established the Foreign Information Surveillance Court, which then came up with your Foreign Information Surveillance Act. Or I guess the FISA, the court was a derivative of the act, or at least established through the act. And then you get these warrants. And I don't know how many, I mean, there's been a couple of occasions, obviously the big one on Carter Page. But before then, there were even instances where the FISC had done some pretty horrendous things, all in secret, and it wasn't discovered until somebody leaked something. And that's when Rand Paul started to get on his horse as a libertarian, saying, quit renewing this damn Patriot Act. There are other ways to do what we want to do. Hell, they caught what was it, Snowden. Let me touch on Snowden for a second,
okay?
Because everybody wants to give him some sympathy and bring him back into the fold. Snowden was much more than just uncovering the CIA's surveillance and retention of domestic intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was asked in War College to be a part of this team, and I'm not going to say too much about it other than the team's mission was to review the impacts of the Snowden incident. And I will tell you that dude stole terabytes of sensitive information.
And he didn't review everything before he leaked it either, did he? I know was Julian Assange that he redacted and reviewed everything before he released it, but Snowden put unfiltered information up there, I believe. I'll have to check that. But
I'm not sure, but there were things that I know he stole that set our country back decades with regard to our ability to secure ourselves against threats. I was shocked. It takes a lot to shock me, but I was shocked. So every time I hear,
without compromising anything, any national security, what's kind of an example or an analogy for something that? How did he do that? He obviously didn't just steal all the padlocks off the front door. Was it encryption type codes or was it?
No, he used his access.
Mm-hmm.
He used the access he had as a CIA analyst. I believe that's what he was.
To steal the information, but the information that he released, what information set us back?
I can't tell you that, but I will just say that we have levels of classified information. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everybody knows there's unclassified, there's secret, there's top secret.
Mm-hmm.
There are special,
and there's SCI.
So that's special compartmented information. All right. Then there's SAP, special access plans or programs, special access programs. So there's SAP, there's SCI, TSSCI. There could be secret SCI, I think. And then within your your special access programs can have two people in them.
Mm-hmm.
You can have the information that I was made aware of that was compromised was impactful in the amount of time it took to develop that information, and then what resulted from that information, and then getting that into the hands of an adversary. You can't replace that time investment. You can't, right? And so it was much more than just what people like to say, the heroic revelation of James Clapper's lie to Congress that the NSA was not listening in or capturing domestic telephone calls made by citizens in the United States. That was just one small aspect of what he did. And so, when I hear people petition, and I'm pretty sure that when they petition Trump to forgive him and bring him home, I'm pretty sure Trump saw all of that and said, no, we can't.
Yeah.
This guy deserves to be in jail. And so what, another thing that's funny is that in one of the positions I was in, so the president gets a presidential daily brief, a PDB. You've probably heard of that, right?
Mhm.
So every day, somebody from CIA, somebody from Langley will go into the White House and sit with the president, usually in the morning, and they will go over the intelligence brief, the presidential daily brief, which includes all the intelligence that they've collected, analyzed, assessed, and then packaged for presentation. The day after that, that usually flows into the military, and your senior command echelon will get that intelligence. That's not to say that they're waiting for it, because the Defense Intelligence Agency not only contributes to the intelligence that goes into the PDB, but you have the Defense Intelligence Agency, and then you have intelligence apparatus within all your commands, right? Sometimes their reach and focus is different, but your commanders are not sitting there waiting to get the same intelligence that the president got the day earlier. They have it. It's just differently packaged, or it comes from different sources, or it's not assessed.
It's refined. Yeah.
Yeah. So the intelligence is flowing all around, and it takes very little time to get two people together and develop a shared understanding of the intelligence, right? And so, but I would see that PDB, usually the day after the CIA Special Activities Office would bring it down into the commander's office, and we'd get it and I'd read it. And it was pretty extensive. I forgot where I was going with this, but Trump. So it always cracks me up when Trump says something in an interview that, as president, the interviewer acts as though Trump is full of shit. They act as, oh no, that's not.
He doesn't know what's going on.
And he's like, you don't understand. Every day I had intelligence at my fingertips.
Yeah.
I know what was going on. Now I may, the way I say it to you may come off as though I don't know what I'm talking about, but that just tells me the interviewer has no idea what goes on in that White House, and so, Trump, he knew it. He knows what's going on. He had to. Now that's not to say that the PDB can't be constructed in a way to obfuscate certain elements of intelligence that they may or may not want the president to know. I mean, they can shape the intelligence however, but he's not just getting it from the PDB. Everybody
that talks to him has
intelligence. Yes.
Yeah.
So if you remember, soon after Trump won, one of the first visits he got in Trump Tower was from Admiral Rogers. Okay. Who was Admiral Rogers? He was your NSA director. What did he go and meet with Trump about in Trump Tower?
I don't know. Probably just giving him an update.
So I can tell you, I will tell you that usually you have, they call it a KLEWG, KLEWG. Okay. Every combatant command has a KLEWG. And what that's called is a Key Leader Engagement Working Group. Key Leader Engagement Working Group. That's so when the commander of U.S. CENTCOM goes and meets with the King of Saudi Arabia, that KLEWG set conditions for that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And those conditions involved coordinating with whole of government apparatus, the three letters, legislative branch, three letters in the executive agency, the legislative branch, other commanders, subordinate commands, whoever the what they call it, the CLEWIG, whoever that working group decided needed to be engaged so as to set the best conditions for success for that key leader engagement. That's who the working group did that with. So when Rogers went to meet with President Trump soon after he won the election, that was not coordinated.
Oh, that was just a random stop.
Wasn't random. Wasn't random. It was very intentional.
Mm-hmm.
But it was not. I mean, and I remember open source reporting at the time. They were like, a couple people tried to chase down the reason for that visit. A couple people tried to chase down the discussion, but it went nowhere. None of the Trump people leaked the conversation that Admiral Rogers had with Trump, the purpose of that visit. I do remember they came back to the the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I do remember they came back to the Obama administration and said, "Did you dispatch or approve Admiral Rogers going to visit Trump?" Nope, didn't know anything about it. Now I think they came back later on and went like, "Oh yeah, I know, we know what happened in that."
But that could have been cover.
That was exactly what it was. It was covering their ass. So
we could talk.
We could
all night.
I got stories.
I'm sure. We'll have to bring it up. Maybe we can have you talk about Israel a little bit. If not right now, but I don't know if you're as well versed on Israel as you are some of the others. Do you have anything that you'd like to tell everybody before we just wrap up here, about the Russia NATO expansion and all that stuff, some final thoughts?
Well, I think the reason Trump is so confident that he can stop that war is that he's not afraid of the military industrial complex. And he knows that there's no real, what they call jus in bello, JUSENBELO. There's no justifiable reason for that war. And so when you lack jus in bello, then it's easy to stop. You just stop it. You just make a phone call. You tell the folks, hey, look, we're no longer contributing to this effort. And without U.S. contributing to the effort, and I would say too that the best I've heard from a national spokesperson level, and he's not a national spokesperson, but Robert Kennedy Jr. has the best insights on this whole Ukraine thing that I've heard to date. And there's another guy, Colonel Douglas McGregor, who is a very, very smart man. He understands what's going on over there too. So I think that's why Trump is confident. As soon as he gets elected, he'll stop the war almost on day one. And I'm pretty sure that the European Union members will be grateful because they'll be able to then repurpose that money to their domestic issues. And there's a lot going on domestically in Germany and France and Britain. I mean, they're falling apart. Their social fabric is disintegrating. And our media doesn't tell us that, but I think that's why it'll be a welcome end to a corrupted conflict.
Well, I hope so. We appreciate you watching. Never mind the bollocks. And until next time, watch the Patriot Punkcast.